Welcome everyone to our webinar tonight. We're so thrilled you joined us. My name is Sue Dykema and I'm the Executive Director of the Aesthetics Society. Tonight we are presenting this webinar as part of a series, and the topic is our new tool to help you make a better informed decision about your breast augmentation. Before we get started, we do want to take a poll of our audience and see who is here with us tonight and how you learned about this webinar. So if you can take a moment to answer those questions, that would be terrific. We will be posting our questions in the chat tonight, so please use the chat, post all your questions, and we'll make sure everything gets answered. The information that's being presented tonight may not represent the position of the Aesthetics Society. However, it is relevant as of today, March 31, 2021. That's a disclaimer. And we will be recording and posting this information on surgery.org within 24 to 48 hours. Lastly, I'd like to thank Allergan Aesthetics for their support of this program through an educational grant. I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Bill Adams, President-elect of the Aesthetics Society. Dr. Adams?
Yes. Thanks so much, Sue. Well, we'd like to welcome everybody. This is, I think, the third webinar that we've had on this topic, and we have a great team that's been working on this. I would like to just introduce my cohorts who've really probably done much more than I and much more knowledgeable about patient decision aids and implementing them into your practice. But we have Chelsea Hagopian, who really has spearheaded a lot of this effort and did her PhD and or master's in nursing and doctorate on this topic. We have Laurie, Casas, who many of you know and has been in leadership and fantastic plastic surgeon for many, many years. Haws also, who's currently the communications commissioner, and myself, and we've made up kind of the core of the informed consent task force. Laurie, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Would you like to make any introductory comments?
You know, the only thing I would say is this is so long overdue to have something so easy to use for our patients and our staff. So I'm super excited for everybody that's on the call, because I think you'll find that patients feel so relieved that you're so informative and that you're working together with them to make a decision about potentially doing breast augmentation. So I think you'll be super excited when you hear Chelsea. I've been using the product now for about a year, and patients just constantly are overwhelmed with the consolidation of the information being in one spot and how helpful it really is in making their decisions. So I hope you feel the same.
Yeah, that's great comments, Laurie. And as many of you know, patient education and informed consent is really an integrated process that goes on, and some of the things, the difficulties, some both patients have noted this and surgeons, but these patient decision aids are evolving into kind of the standard of care. In a lot of places, some states, they actually have been made the standard of care. But we have been working hard to provide you and your patients with a tool that is quite powerful. And so I think with that, Chelsea, you're the true expert in all this, and so I know you're gonna lead off with a presentation. So why don't you take it away, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you so much for the warm welcome, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you today. I thank all of you for the opportunity, and I look forward to some engaging discussion throughout the presentation. So my goals for today are to provide an overview of shared decision-making and patient decision aids, or PDAs as they're often called, focusing on what they are, why they're important in plastic surgery, and then to walk through how to use the patient decision aid, making quality decisions about primary breast augmentation surgery. And Dr. Casas and Dr. Adams will also share their perspectives and maybe some of their early experiences and insights using the PDA in practice. And then we'll wrap up with an opportunity for Q&A and informal discussion. I would also like to encourage you to download the PDA if you have not already done so, and you can access it directly by simply navigating to the web address noted on the slide. Before we review the PDA, I'd like to offer a bit of context, as there are a few key concepts that are helpful here. Starting with the definition of shared decision-making, because there are a number of different and often vague interpretations of the term. Most simply, shared decision-making is described by Dr. Victor Montori, who is a recognized leader in shared decision-making, as the process of, quote, making care fit. Consistent with this approach of making care fit, shown here is the more complete definition I most prefer, which is shared decision-making is the deliberate process of collaboration to make evidence-based healthcare decisions that requires active engagement of, at minimum, the patient and provider, and is based on a foundation of mutual respect, where the patient is empowered as a full partner in care. The essential elements of shared decision-making are noted in color, and I want to highlight a few of them here. Firstly, the use of the term patient here refers to the person receiving the care resulting from the decision, whereas the term provider refers to the person performing the care resulting from the decision, which in the context of primary breast augmentation surgery is the plastic surgeon. Specifically, I want to acknowledge here that the use of the term patient is a subject of debate with respect to how recipients of healthcare services prefer to be called. And I would also like to share the rationale for its use here. Notably, some people may view the label of patient negatively, associating it with a sick role and potentially even with a paternalistic model of healthcare. Alternative terms that are commonly used include healthcare consumer and client. There are two specific reasons behind the decision to use the term patient in this definition of shared decision-making, and also to describe the decision support tool that's the focus of this webinar, the patient decision aid. The first reason is based on the recently published guideline for authors reporting on research about patient decision aids. It was recognized that several different terms were used, limiting the ability to find, study, and use these decision support tools. Patient decision aid was identified as the most commonly used term in the literature, as well as the term used in the guidelines for developing and evaluating the quality of PDAs published by the International Patient Decision Aid Standards, or IPDAS collaboration. So the reporting guidelines explicitly recommend using the term patient decision aid to improve the quality of reporting about these tools and, quote, to support consistency and to ease identification of relevant studies when searching the literature. The second reason the term patient is used here is because my perspective is informed by my being a nurse. In the 2015 revision of the American Nurses Association Code of Ethics for Nurses, it makes explicit the decision to use the term patient in the code to describe all recipients of nursing care, to include patients, clients, consumers, families, communities, and populations. The second key element I want to highlight is based on a foundation of mutual respect. This means genuinely valuing the unique contribution of all persons involved in a patient's decision-making process, so all feel welcome to share their perspective and concerns and know that their voice is heard. Third, where the patient is empowered, refers to the need for patients to have the knowledge and capacity to actively participate in healthcare decisions and activities, and to feel supported and satisfied that care fits the context of their life. Lastly, as a full partner in care, recognizes the expertise of both the patient and provider as of equal importance and equally essential to optimal decision-making. So why is shared decision-making important in plastic surgery? Research suggests that certain characteristics make a decision more or less responsive to decision support interventions, such as patient decision aids. Knowing the characteristics of the types of decisions and the decision-making process helps to explain why shared decision-making is important in plastic surgery and how patient decision aids can best be used to support quality decision-making. Types of decisions in plastic surgery are what we call preference sensitive, which means the right decision differs from patient to patient based on what is most important to them. Put another way, the right decision for you may not be the right decision for someone else, even when considering the same procedure. For example, when deciding between saline and silicone implants, neither option is best for everyone. Rather, which option is best depends largely on the values and preferences of the individual patient. Patient decision aids, or PDAs, are evidence-based tools that help patients meaningfully participate in decision-making about healthcare options. More than an educational pamphlet or website, there are 3 defining characteristics. A PDA 1 makes explicit the decision or decisions that need to be made, the options and their features. 2, helps patients to clarify and communicate their values and preferences. And 3, empowers patients and clinicians to work together to make informed decisions based on the clinically appropriate options, the best available scientific evidence, and what matters most to patients. The purpose of this slide is simply to point out that a large and growing body of evidence strongly supports the benefit of using patient decision aids. A lot of things are involved and need to happen to get you from a place of thinking about breast augmentation surgery to a successful result that reflects your expectations. Much of the existing educational and informed consent materials are either incomplete, for example, by only focusing on one of the decisions, such as choosing between saline and silicone implants, or by not placing the risks and benefits in the context of your unique circumstances. Or they are biased, for example, to a particular breast implant manufacturer, rather than presenting all possible options across manufacturers with clinically meaningful data that allows you and your plastic surgeon, plastic surgery care team, and personal support system to meaningfully compare the risks and benefits of all clinically appropriate options available to address your specific concerns and to achieve your desired goals. Now, let's briefly compare this to a big decision in another area of life not related to healthcare, purchasing a car. Imagine if when looking at different cars, you only knew about the different models of one manufacturer. There may be a decent amount of variety offered, but there are some features that carry different implications for safety, long-term cost, etc., that you would want to know about all of the options to decide what fits best in the context of your life. Importantly, this data is readily available to you to easily find and compare options across manufacturers when it comes to buying a car, but not when comparing all available options for breast implants. Now, this is important to keep in mind as we now move on to review the patient decision aid. I'd like to quickly check in to see if there are any questions or if Dr. Casas or Dr. Adams have any comments they'd like to add for discussion.
I'm good.
No, I think you're doing great. Once you, I think keep going.
Good deal. Again, I'd like to encourage you to download the PDA if you've not done so already. And again, you can access it directly by simply navigating to the web address noted on this slide. So the PDA has 3 specific purposes. 1, it helps prepare you for decision-making and informed consent conversations with your surgeon, plastic surgery care team, and personal support system by introducing all of the relevant decisions necessary for you to consider before primary breast augmentation surgery, educating you on the basic essential information you need to know about each decision, and helping you to identify your goals and concerns. 2, it helps facilitate shared decision-making with you and your plastic surgeon, as well as all relevant others. Specifically, it supports your developing of informed values and preferences about each decision by combining the essential evidence-based information and exercises to help clarify your goals and concerns, and ensures that everyone involved in your decision-making and informed consent processes are all on the same page throughout the entire journey. Lastly, it helps to confirm that the decisions made are the right decisions for you, the decisions you'll be happy with, by screening for decisional conflict, identifying specific decision support needs, and the activities that can help to address them. The purpose of this first page is to orient to who the patient decision aid is intended for and why and how it should be used. The PDA is patient population and procedure specific because the informational needs and circumstances differ based on the indication for which breast implants are being used. The research informing the development of this patient decision aid was focused specifically on adult, age 18 and older, females actively considering primary breast augmentation surgery. Only the information considered essential for all relevant patients considering this procedure is included in this PDA. Importantly, additional information that is essential to specifically you may not be included in the PDA. Rather, the PDA should help to support you and your plastic surgeon to have a meaningful conversation and to identify such person-specific information. It is worth noting that the PDA might initially seem pretty long or like a lot of material. However, the PDA is divided into 5 distinct sections that can be used individually based on your specific informational needs and stage of decision-making. Each independent section is guided by an overarching question that corresponds to a specific decision point along the natural decisional timeline when considering and making decisions about primary breast augmentation surgery. For example, sections such as the "How should I prepare for decision-making" may be most useful to you to review before consultation to help you to prepare for decision-making. The section "What questions should I ask my plastic surgeon" may be most useful during the consultation and informed consent process to facilitate shared decision-making. And the last section, "What are my next steps," may be most useful to you after consultation. Importantly, it empowers everyone on the team with evidence-based information to best support your decision-making wherever you are in your decision-making process. Each section makes explicit the relevant decision or decisions necessary for you to consider, the essential information needed to make a decision, and details about why the information is needed or how it should specifically inform your decision-making. Values clarification activities are included throughout to assist you in identifying and communicating your goals, concerns, and preferences to your plastic surgeon. And the entire PDA is color-coded for ease of identification of the relevant decision. What I think is most important about how the PDA is structured is that it follows adult learner theory by orienting information to the context of the decision at hand, so the newly learned information can be immediately applied, as opposed to the content-oriented traditional informed consent document that just parrots long lists of risks, etc., with no guidance for how the information should be applied or how it is relevant to your actual decision-making. The page numbers for each of the 5 independent sections are shown here if you'd like to follow along. So let's take a look at the first question. How should I prepare for decision-making? As mentioned, this first section, "How should I prepare for decision-making," on page 2 of the PDA, is dedicated to supporting your preparation for decision-making. Your values matter. Clearly identifying and communicating your values is critical for helping to make sure you and your plastic surgeon make the best decisions for achieving your expected goals and addressing your specific concerns. It helps to make sure everyone is on the same page about what matters most to you. So much information is out there. These 5 quality checks can help you to evaluate the quality of any additional information you find. Lastly, on page 2, your surgeon's education, training, and qualifications matter. There are many physicians other than board eligible and certified plastic surgeons that perform plastic surgery procedures. So this section at the bottom of page 2 of the PDA helps you to know how to ask the right questions about your surgeon's preparation and experience. Further, recently reported research has shown that surgeon training is important. Specifically, one large study found that when non-plastic surgery trained physicians perform plastic surgery body contouring procedures, they have a higher complication rate than plastic surgery trained surgeons. Returning to our 5 sections, we now move on to the next question. Is plastic surgery right for me? On page 3 of the PDA, the top section, "Is plastic surgery right for me?" is a distinct section because the information presented is common to all aesthetic plastic surgeries, rather than procedure specific to primary breast augmentation surgery. These are the general risks of surgery and patient-specific medical and social history or lifestyle factors that must be considered. Once again, returning to our 5 sections, We now move on to the third question. Should I have breast augmentation surgery? The bottom section of this page 3 and the top section of the following page, which is page 4 of the PDA, are focused to assist you in clarifying and communicating your goals and preferences to your plastic surgeon. This is important because there's no true reference standard or accepted common language for patients and surgeons to communicate about what you want and what your expectations are. For example, a number of respondents in the crowdsourcing study of nearly 400 adult females actively considering primary breast augmentation surgery that informed the development of this PDA stated that they wanted to change or improve the shape of their breasts. So this was included pictorially here to help facilitate mutual understanding of what exactly a changed or improved shape actually means to both you and your plastic surgeon. The bottom of page 4 then moves on to describe the general risks of primary breast augmentation surgery. Note here that the topics have a checkbox next to them. The reason for these checkboxes is to help guide consideration of what matters most to you when deliberating options and their pros and cons with your plastic surgeon. Page 5 of the PDA continues to describe the general risks of primary breast augmentation surgery. Here, I want to highlight the need to clearly differentiate between complications and expectations. For example, the risk of cosmetic dissatisfaction following surgery as a complication is differentiated here from the expectation that satisfaction with results may change over time, which is not a complication of surgery. The importance of differentiating complications from expectations is further seen in that traditional informed consent documents and patient education materials often blur this distinction. Page 6 and page 7 of the PDA review the implant style decisions and compares the options and their features. Here, I want to highlight the rationale for the inclusion of the "why is this important" descriptions. Adult learner theory further follows that in addition to needing to immediately apply newly learned information, adult learners also need to know why the information matters. So to account for this, a description about why the information is important or how it should specifically inform your decision-making is explicitly included each time new information is presented. I also want to point out here the sections that mention a key benefit. The true benefit is based on what you're trying to achieve and which option will best help you to achieve it, which needs to be guided by the plastic surgeon during consult. This presented a challenge to balancing the presentation of risks and benefits in this PDA. So to account for this, the PDA reiterates prompts for what to discuss with your plastic surgeon related to the decision at hand. In the middle of page 7 is the section shown here that reviews a few key considerations for choosing the right size implant for you. And this section at the bottom of page 7 is an opportunity for you, your plastic surgeon, relevant others involved in your decision-making process, and others you trust to note additional quality information resources to learn more about aspects of the decision and options that matter most to you and that you would like to learn more about and to inform your specific decision-making process. This is relevant because remember, while the minimal essential information is presented in this PDA, it does not include all possible information that may be important to you or relevant to your unique circumstance. Page 8 of this PDA reviews surgical approach decisions, the first, incision location, and the second, placement plane. The reason only 2 incision location options are presented here for direct comparison is because these were the only 2 options that were deemed essential for all relevant patients considering primary breast augmentation surgery by those who responded to the expert consensus surveys sent out in 2019 to active members of the Aesthetic Society. So you will notice an asterisk here describing that your plastic surgeon may discuss other incision location options with you if clinically appropriate for you to consider. The second point I want to highlight here is why these 2 decisions have accompanying photos. For information about incision location and implant placement plane, more than 60% of respondents in the crowdsourcing study informing the development of this PDA prefer this information to be presented as photos. Again, returning to our 5 sections to quickly revisit the first section, how should I prepare for decision making, as this content is presented at the beginning on page 2 and further on page 9, which is after the bulk of the educational content is presented. The reason for this is because on page 9 of the PDA is a check your knowledge quiz. This knowledge quiz is a simple exercise for you to help ensure you and your plastic surgeon start on the same page based on your existing background knowledge about primary breast augmentation surgery. Put another way, it can help to focus consultations on what you need to know rather than on what you already know. The specific questions included in this quiz were based on the essential information items for informed consent in primary breast augmentation surgery defined in the expert consensus study informing the development of this PDA, and focused based on 1, the questions most commonly answered incorrectly in the crowdsourcing study informing the development of this PDA, and 2, insights gleaned from the presentations and testimony of patients and patient advocates during the FDA Advisory Committee meeting in March of 2019 on information they felt they were not informed of before undergoing surgery, but believe all women considering the surgery should know. Back again to our 5 sections, we'll now look at the 4th question. What questions should I ask my plastic surgeon? This worksheet included on page 10 of the PDA is formatted to help guide the conversation between you and your plastic surgeon during consultation. It includes frequently asked questions, with each question prompt including the relevant key considerations and essential risks for you to consider and select what matters most to your personal decision-making process. The questions are color-coded to the relevant section of the PDA for easy reference to additional information as needed during consultation. Importantly, a key feature of this consultation guide that I want to highlight is the link to an icon array tool corresponding to the last question on the worksheet, how likely are complications? This tool can help you and your plastic surgeon talk about risks that matter most to you using your surgeon-specific complication rates. The format of this consultation guide is also informed by the crowdsourcing study I mentioned earlier. Free text comments described current practices commonly used to prepare for consult, including printing information, writing a question list, and taking notes during consult. And returning one last time to our 5 sections to conclude with our last question, what are my next steps? This last section of the PDA helps you to review your next steps, including things to consider before scheduling surgery, such as pre and post-op expectations and your financial responsibilities, both now and in the future. And if you are ready to make a decision about primary breast augmentation surgery. This section at the bottom of page 11 in the PDA includes 4 simple questions that has been extensively studied to identify possible decision support needs that must be addressed before making a final decision. If you answer no to any of these questions, the research suggests that you may not be ready to make a decision. Below the questions are suggested activities to try based on your specific decisional needs. If you answered yes to all 4 questions, this is a good evidence-based indicator that you are ready to make a decision. At the top of the next page, which is page 12 of the PDA, are 2 sections to confirm your decisions. The first section asks you to select your specific decisions. These are all of the specific decisions that are reviewed in the PDA. The second section here asks you to consider the specific decisions you selected as you answer 4 simple questions that have also been well studied to gauge the effectiveness of decisions. For example, if you select strongly disagree for all of the questions, the research suggests this is a bad decision. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you select strongly agree for all of the questions, the research suggests this is a good decision. The usefulness of this is to simply offer an evidence-based tool to help you, your plastic surgeon, and all relevant others directly involved in your decision-making to feel confident in the quality of decisions made before undergoing primary breast augmentation surgery. Most importantly here is that the use of these 2 validated scales in this section of the PDA applies an evidence-based approach to confirming your readiness to make a decision and the validity of informed consent. keeping in mind that decision-making and informed consent processes should be evidence-based, not arbitrary. At the bottom of page 12 is where you and your surgeon formally acknowledge informed consent. Reported at the end of this PDA on pages 13 through 18 is the technical information about the PDA and its development, including the date of last update and update policy, the credentials of the developer and reviewers, funding and disclosures, and references to the sources of evidence used. Inclusion of this technical information is a key characteristic of high-quality PDAs. This is also important when you think back to our how to evaluate the quality of information tool on page 2. Shown here is page 14 of the PDA. I just want to reiterate here that everything in the patient decision aid, including the specific sources of evidence used for each specific section, is color coordinated to make it easy to identify which of the 5 sections of the PDA the information relates to. And lastly, I want to point out on page 17 of the patient decision aid is the table shown here, which provides an overview of the PDA development process. To summarize, the patient decision aid is an evidence-based educational tool to help empower you and everyone directly involved in your decision-making and informed consent process with evidence-based information to best support your decision-making about primary breast augmentation surgery wherever you are in your decision-making process. In closing, I'd like to once again encourage you to download the PDA if you've not already done so. Thank you again for the opportunity to share this presentation, and I really appreciate your time and interest, and I look forward to any questions or feedback anyone may have, as well as further discussion from Dr. Adams and Dr. Casas.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. It was great. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, and you know, I personally have been involved in kind of patient education and talking about that for 20 years, and the one thing that we do know, whether you're a patient or a surgeon, is that the more patients know about breast augmentation, the better they do. And that's 100% of the time. And that's what's so intriguing about this PDA. I think it's a really great educational aid. And there's a lot of people that I think that both on the patient side and surgeon side that would benefit from trying it. Laurie, I know that you've actually probably, from the clinical standpoint, really implemented this. I thought maybe it would be useful for you just to share maybe your experience and how you integrated this into your practice and maybe some other insights you have.
Yeah, I'd love to. So the part that's interesting is if you've devoted yourself to giving and providing decision aids in other ways throughout your career, this is just consolidating that for you. So it's not anything new, but it's set up in a way that's so user-friendly for the patient. So what we did was we emailed all of our patients that we had something housed on the website. So we uploaded it on the website. We sent it out by, Facebook and Instagram. And then anytime a patient calls for an appointment for either a breast augmentation or breast augmentation revision, augmentation mastopexy, we send them the digital version and ask them to review it before coming to the office. When they get to the office, they're given a hard copy if they didn't download and bring it themselves. Most patients actually bring it. They download it at home and bring it. And they've written, scribbled all over it. So it's really caught on. I don't have my staff involved in any part of it, except I walk in, they've already read it or are reading it, and then we go through everything that's on the patient decision aid, because that's kind of always been my thing anyway, to be very comprehensive. Just they have something to write on and take home and refer back to. I've also shown it to all the patients that have had breast augmentation that come back, for follow-up. And they are just so excited. They said, I was scribbling down notes when we were talking, and this way it was all consolidated. It was easy for me to use. I think it's great. That's everyone's opinion, that it's informative, it's helpful, it truly connects them with, me, their future plastic surgeon. They feel like they've gotten a really good handle on all the perspectives that they need to think about in terms of saline, silicone, smooth, textured, BII, everything. It's anyway, it's been great. And so I'm so thrilled that I met Chelsea in 2019 at the FDA meetings, because this has really been a wonderful asset for my practice. So thanks.
Dr. Adams, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I said it's really interesting because there have been other things out there, but they're very different from these PDAs, which, Chelsea, these are like validated, accepted instruments for education and informed consent, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so anybody that's kind of listening to this and trying, because I know how it goes. Like new things sometimes are ominous for people to implement, but this is, I think, very different from some of the other things that have been out there in the past for various procedures, kind of digital kind of educational tools. I think this is a very evidence-based process. I think Laurie and Minnie and I have learned a lot from Chelsea, just how you go about validating this and coming up with this. And I think that, Laurie, what you described is a very pragmatic and systematic way to go about implementing that. I think giving it to the patient before they come in. There's a ton of information in the PDA itself, and the patient has the opportunity to get very easy links to more information if they want to. But I think, have you found, Laurie, it saves you time in the office? Do you feel like the patients that have been able to go through this, are they more informed and educated? What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. The patients that actually download it and bring it in with scribbling notes and et cetera, are the ones that, the consultation just goes right into, implant selection. We just kind of have, it's very easy to get going into the, the meat of the consultation, what's really important to them in terms of how they want to look, which implant's going to achieve that, et cetera. It was really tough before the PDA because a lot of times patients truly, come in with zero information. And even though we would give them information when they arrived, it wasn't like this. It wasn't consolidated. It was an informed consent that's very sterile, very legally oriented, that they basically don't even want to look at because they feel like it's just kind of a CYA, no, so it's really shortened the consultation when they look at it ahead of time. So it's critical that the staff that sends them, the digital version says, please read this ahead of time. You'll value your consultation so much more, if you're prepared.
Chelsea, are you just in your work on PDAs in general and through the development of this one, which is really part of your thesis, correct? Or your doctorate work? Yeah. So what have been the other challenges people have faced with other PDAs, or do you have any insights into that in terms of things that have been learned in the past with some of these other instruments that may be useful to people trying to implement this one?
Certainly, that's a great question. The biggest barrier to using patient decision aids in practice is that actual implementation. So figuring out how it works in the flow of a usual clinic day. I considered that because there is substantial evidence that looks at actually getting the PDA into practice and the lack of that. And I tried to apply a quality improvement theoretical approach in that things should work seamlessly into clinic by replacing, say, lower value activities that are already being done. So you're not adding things to practice. So that's why I focused in on that traditional informed consent document that is not really value additive to the practice, but it's something that is pretty much universal and that's done in a surgical practice. And so by targeting that and moving it alongside of that usual clinic flow, I think that has hopefully really helped to seamlessly integrate it into clinical practice.
Yeah, that's excellent. I personally I employ and have done this for 20 years, a full-time patient educator who actually does our patient education, and you know, we've had kind of a pretty exhaustive list of documents, which have a lot of similar information, but I think what my educator has been doing, she really likes the PDA, especially as something to send to the patient, let them review, and then she'll discuss the information, any questions the patient has about that. But I know there's a lot of people, I mean, that don't employ a full-time patient educator, and either it's a part-time thing for staff, which is hard, or, the doctor's trying to do it all. And I just think that this is just it's really something that you're able to use kind of turnkey. The feedback that we've gotten from patients thus far has been overall very, very positive, and same thing with the physicians. Again, this is in a PDF format right now. Hopefully, we'll have the ability to actually put it in a online HTML kind of digital format in the near future, which may make it even easier for patients to go through and execute ultimately, and even sign. But the PDF version is quite easy to use and send to patients. So. There's one question, and I know that for people that are on, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom, and we'll get to those. But there's a question: is why does the picture of a subpectoral implant show total muscular coverage when the inferior part of the implant is typically subcutaneous? And that's true. Typically, the lower part is. First of all, I said that's really insightful that you were able to notice that. I actually I'll go back and look at that and see. I think it's certainly more of a schematic. I think that's more just trying to show patients that the implant's on top of the muscle or below the muscle, but we can certainly go back and look at that. Chelsea or Laurie, any comments on that?
Absolutely. So for this version, some of the pictures are limited by the licensing of freely accessible images online. And so it can certainly be revised, and I anticipate that it will be revised as we continue to get feedback on things. And absolutely, the long-term goal would be to translate it to an interactive web-based version. And so at the conclusion of it, it would actually compile itself a summary of everything that the patient has worked on before coming in for consultation. So that way, when they come in, they have just that one-page summary of everything that they've gone through. And then of course, you can go back and go into more depth of certain areas that is most important to the patient or of most concern to them. But thank you so much for identifying that. And that will absolutely be on the list of things to review. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'd add to that, Chelsea, is just to kind of reiterate what you said. Again, this is always a work in progress. So what we are wanting to do, as the Informed Consent Task Force has been trying to support Chelsea in development of this, is to get feedback. So both from feedback from patients, feedback from surgeons, practice managers, people that are involved in it, and over time, it will be a dynamic. This is certainly not set in stone, and Chelsea's made a number of revisions even in the past few months just based on feedback. So yeah, we're looking for people to use it and to provide feedback. So there's a question from one of our esteemed colleagues, Mr. Bob Aker, who says, when patients claim lack of informed consent, which questions/items in the PDA are surgeons forgetting to discuss? So Chelsea, that's probably a good one for you to address.
So if they claim lack of informed consent, my understanding would be that that is very patient specific as far as the specific claim of a lack of informed consent. With respect to patient decision aids and liability, the evidence is very clear and consistent that patients are more informed and make decisions that are concordant with their values and informed preferences. It is challenged by the current state laws that are either a physician standard or a patient standard, where in particular, since this is a more novel evidence-based approach that differs from that traditional informed consent, since the majority of people in practice are still using the traditional informed consent document, that's kind of the standard in physician standard states that it's weighed against. I will say that Washington State has changed their informed consent law to a shared decision-making standard, where it's recognized that if use of a patient decision aid as certified by the Washington State Healthcare Authority, it constitutes prima facie evidence of informed consent. So that offers additional liability protection because of the clear and consistent evidence that patients do have improved knowledge. But there is certainly a long way to go in making it a standard of care across the country and ideally internationally as well. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, you know, and we do know just these are old studies that were done. It's complicated because sometimes you know, the door kind of swings both ways on this, and there can be there's oftentimes there are studies out of Houston, and it's actually in the cardiac surgery literature about, you know, where they did a study and they recorded the informed consent process of the physician going through all these line items of risk for cardiac surgery. And then they went back and interviewed the patients. And oftentimes the patient would say, well, they didn't talk to me about that. And what happened is that oftentimes it was talked about. It was just so much information. It just is impossible for the patient to assimilate. So I think that, I think that's one of the goals of the PDA, is that most of us as are practicing surgery, we try to do the best we can of giving patients a lot of this information, but it is a lot of information. So I think the PDA is developed in a way to try to provide as much information, but at a rate where it can be assimilated and then reinforced. And that's like, sometimes I've seen some people and they look at it, they go, why is there a quiz in there? That's stupid or whatever. But it's kind of these things that people have looked at, right, Chelsea, where that's part of the process of trying to make sure that actually they can assimilate as much information as they can.
Certainly. So building on that, we know from the quality improvement literature that relying on clinician vigilance alone is not effective. And so really support materials in practice should actually support the goal that you're trying to achieve. And so one of the things with the patient decision aid is that it also tackles the issue of information overload. So it is understood that you may know so much about primary breast augmentation surgery, but the problem is that a patient may still not know the essential information. And so the goal of the PDA was to use a very deliberate approach in identifying what specific information is deemed essential by the relevant clinical experts, which board certified plastic surgeons, and I specifically narrowed it to active members of the Aesthetic Society. And then that information was then turned to a crowdsourcing study where patients could then identify the scope or how much information about those specific items are needed to inform their individual decision-making. Now, again, this is a minimum reference standard, but it's the goal is really to identify that minimum essential information that's necessary for an informed decision about primary breast augmentation surgery. But of course, there's going to be more information that's needed for individual patients and their unique circumstances. So it allows for the patient and plastic surgeon to identify that and potential knowledge gaps of the essential information and reconcile that together.
There's a question from Dr. Mark Jewell about I think this was a discussion in a previous webinar about taking this PDA and submitting it to some of the common malpractice carriers to get their feedback. And I think where we are with that is it's in process. So I think that's been submitted, but I'm not sure that we've gotten feedback from any malpractice carrier yet. But I don't, Chelsea, I think you probably have certainly some feedback from maybe other PDAs or other information from malpractice carriers. Can you share anything on that?
Sure. So a shared decision-making colleague of mine, Dr. Thaddeus Pope, he is JD PhD, so he's focused on really the legal aspect of that. And I know that a lot of his work has been focused on the implementation of PDAs and coming at it from the malpractice insurance carrier's perspective. That is the next step of this research also, is to get specific feedback from malpractice carriers that are common for plastic surgeons. That information I don't have yet, but I hope to in short order. And so I hope to get that information to you. But absolutely, that would be the next thing, is to have them approved by malpractice carriers such as the doctor's company or other common ones used by plastic surgeons. So thank you for noting that.
Chelsea, can you comment on this when you're presenting or answering one of the questions? You said something about one of the, I think in Washington, that there was some relief of liability based on, for people that are using certain PDAs. Can you tell people about that more specifically?
Certainly. So the Washington State Healthcare Authority started a state-based initiative for approving and implementing patient decision aids in practice. And the Washington State Healthcare Authority has approved certain patient decision aids. They will periodically place a call for submission of patient decision aids to them for review. Everything is always limited by time and funding. And so it was initially specifically identified in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, specific provisions of the need for shared decision-making patient decision aids and the need for a national independent certifying body for patient decision aids, but no funding was appropriated. But Washington State did have funding for a state-based initiative. So that is why that they've really been on the cusp of that and making their change in their informed consent law. So the language is that if it's approved by the Washington State Healthcare Authority, there may be a little bit more nuance with respect to those that have not been approved by the Washington State Healthcare Authority, but say meet other standards. There may be more nuanced language of that I don't have right at my fingertips, but I'm happy to follow up with more information about that. But it is the direction that I hope to see other states go.
Thank you. So I think I don't see any other questions. Laurie, would you like to make any concluding maybe remarks before we?
Let's see. I'm unmuted. There you go. I keep getting, so you can look at my still picture. I would just say, implement it. Have your patients that have had breast augmentation with you read it. It gave me a lot of insight, because they're the ones that said that it was nice to have something to go home with that basically covered everything that they had been educated about, and now they had to sit down and make a decision. So they really loved it, and that really spurred me on to adopting it. And just today I had 2 attorneys that were coming in for either primary or revision augmentation, and they said I was the first physician that had given them any substantial information that was going to actually help them make decisions. And that kind of scared me, in the sense that in my area, apparently, there are plastic surgeons that are not really even dealing with informed consent, which hopefully as a society we can really stress and then hopefully implement the importance of having PDAs. Even if they're not legal yet, it's just such a better way for patients to collaborate with you on their decisions. So it's exciting. So I hope you guys feel the same way.
Chelsea?
I'd like to extend that just a brief moment, and that I do hope to send out a follow-up survey to active members of the Aesthetic Society in a few months after people have had the opportunity to try using it in practice to get more formal feedback. So please do look for that survey.
Yeah, I think that certainly great information from you, Chelsea, and Laurie. I think it's very helpful in putting things in perspective for people. We really would like, you know, whether it's patient office staff that's on the call or doctors, really like you to try using this in your patients, as Laurie and Chelsea have detailed, because we want to get your feedback. And so that really be the next steps as we kind of are in a refinement phase of this. So it would be fantastic to get that. For any of the patients that are on this call, we'd like to have your feedback as well. We're happy to interface you know, with you however you would find useful, but your input is also you know, welcomed. So you know, with that, Sarah, is there if somebody wants to get in touch with you, is there a way you can send out a email or something they can interface with you? They have a question to follow up on?
Yeah, sure. I'll put my email in the chat box and you can reach out to me with any questions.
Yeah, and we're happy to interface with you too, but I think we'll have you go through Sarah initially. And then last thing, I just want to, this whole webinar series that we've been doing wouldn't be possible without the educational grant that we got from Allergan Aesthetics. So we want to thank Allergan for that. They've been fantastic in supporting much of our educational endeavors, as well as the development of things like this PDA. So we want to thank them. And thank you for attending, and we'll look forward to more work on this in the future. So everybody have a great night.